Okay, so we have our soundboard with the brace attached, with a very slight curve on the soundboard. About 1.5 millimeters either side. Our lyre is carved from a plank that's 22 millimeters deep. Now at this point we're going to taper it very slightly and to fit the soundboard. So the idea is, explain this. We'll mark on a position here, and let's do 14 or 15 millimeters. This is just the place where the so we're now going to inset the soundboard into the body. Now we could route all the way around, but that will take a lot of time and it's very hard to do. An easier way to do it, and also that will create the tapered lyre that we want. We want a lyre that's thicker at the bottom and thinner at the top. That improves balance, seems to improve the sound. It feels better to hold. So we mark on 14 millimeters here. Same on this ends. Now this pencil mark tells us the extent that the soundboard's going to be fitted into. What we now need to do is to measure our soundboard. Now at this particular cedar one, it's a little bit thicker than I would use for maple, so it's probably left at just over 3 millimeters, I think. Let's have a look. So the thickness at the very end of this particular cedar soundboard is 3.3 millimeters. It will probably go down to about 3 millimeters once it's finally sanded. So what we're going to do is make a rebate that's 3 millimeters here that tapers down to nothing here. So to do that, it's a lot simpler than it sounds. So we mark a measurement 3 millimeters here. And we're going to draw a line from the very bottom of the lyre on the side all the way. You can see that. So the wood we have to remove is this wood here. And it diminishes less and less and less and less until we get to the end and nothing is taken off at all. Now this is 3 millimeters here we're going to take out. So what we need to do now is to measure this distance here, and to transfer the marks to the inside edge for a point of guidance. And we do the same on this side as well. We're going to measure 3 millimeters. And again, measure all the way to the bottom, a tapered line. This is just the whole idea of this is once we've we insetted it, glued the top on, the lyre will then have a taper. And from this point here, we're going to actually taper the head down. This part here, we're going to reduce this down to this point here. It won't be visible now, but I'll draw it on roughly as a guide. But yeah, so the head will taper from this point down to the headstock here. What I usually do is drill the holes first and then taper it down. So we're going to measure this point here and then transfer the marks to the side. Now you can actually do it by eye if you've got a sharp pencil. He says, I'm taking a pencil sharpener. Take a pencil sharpener, make sure your pencil's sharp. You can do this with ruler. This works actually very well. Make sure the pencil line's on. And this is kind of a guidance, because what we're going to do, we're going to make some saw marks, and then we're going to connect these saw marks up and then sand it down with a board. So we're not completely alone. As long as we get the measurements correct on this side, and the saw cuts don't go too below this lines that we've put on here, then we can create our step. I'm just going to mark the inner edge. So this wood has all got to be removed. First we're going to mark on the extent. This joint is either covered up with metal straps, or sometimes I use a piece of decorative wood on this model. Usually this is covered in a metal strap, soundboard strap. Okay. The tool I'm going to use, you can do this completely by eye, and use a saw, checking both sides as you go very slowly. Now this is a little tool I've got. This is a fret saw for guitar making, and it has a slidable fence on it. The idea is that it will only go down as far as the fence allows. If you don't have one of these, what you can do, this is the DIY version of a depth stop. It's a piece of wood, nice and square, and you just adjust this. Now you can adjust this with a pin hammer very lightly, and then tighten it again once you've got the exact amount you want. So you can double check. If you're unsure about the height, do a test cut first and then measure the saw cut. Sometimes it's enough just to place your vernier caliper on. Sometimes you want to double check. Sometimes the curve is just slightly different. It's 1.9 millimeters. So it's 2, so it's just slightly. And we know our first cut should be 3 millimeters. But we have some 2 millimeter cuts here to do. If you just want to use the saw by itself, you have to double check, stop every saw cut and double check how deep you're going. Now this way means that it won't go deeper than the piece of wood. You still need to double check as you go in case it comes loose. But it's a good way of doing it, and you just keep on going. Now these are going to set the marks. Once this is done, we're going to be able to take off this wood quite easily. Especially on the end grain here, it's very hard to plane that off easily. But with the saw cuts to help us, it's a matter of moving. It's safer than routing. Routing, the danger is you're going to break out a lot of wood, especially on the edge here. This is quite vulnerable now, this edge. And to get this down to depth as well, you can go around using a knife. By setting the level with the saw first, you've got a place for your knife or chisel or spoke shave to go. And it makes the process a lot simpler before we start sanding down with a board. When so in the top of the rebate, I like to saw with a small saw first to make a starting cut. So it follows the knife cut that we made before. And we're just going to work our way down. So So we've sawn down to the level on both sides now. We're just going to do the final adjustment. And be careful at this point, we don't want to go over the lines. We want to keep as much soundboard depth here as we can. At the same time, we're trying to gradually taper it so it's we've done it one side. In the past I have done this purely off the spoke shave. I've used spoke shaves and knives to take this out to the pencil line without using the saw. Because the saw, if you've got a depth stop, this makes it so much more accurate and easier and saves a lot of energy and time. And you can do this all with knife, chisel and saw without using a spoke shave if you don't have one. So with the Lyre screwed down with a wide chisel, it's possible to I'm using the bevel down. I don't want this chisel to dig in, so we're using the bevel down so that it can only go up. That way we can control the depth. Again, we're using the pencil, that we can see the pencil line along this side, and we're not going any deeper than the saw cuts. Here on the end grain. Now, in places like the side here, we can get a pull plate in. Once we follow, we don't go below the pencil line. And the same with here. see the saw marks tell us how far we can go down. It's still quite fine. I don't want to take too many shavings off at the time. Again, I'm going to remove this around the other side, work on both sides, dust everything down a bit. And downside is this is left-handed. So the saw cuts stop the wood from chipping off. It also gives us a visual and physical depth, so we know how deep we're cutting here. We can keep checking the sides to make sure we're close to the pencil line. That's pretty much how we do it. And if you're good, you can just use the knife, without using the sanding board at all. The sanding board is a nice extra thing to get it extra smooth. with the rebate done, we can now fit the top. First need to mark exactly where the top is. The centre line should be aligned. Just going to trim the top. Once we trim this, then the soundboard should just fit in. Do this on the disc sander, or just by saw is fine. I'm using a model maker's saw because it's going to split the top at the least. I'm only cutting 3mm down. This joint will be covered up by the metal straps on this machine, but we still don't want to split any of the fibres more than we have to. Now we just need to trim this to size a little bit closer. Within 5mm around the edge is going to be ideal for clamping and applying glue. But before we do that, we're going to put the label in and we'll sign and date this particular instrument.